So hello, everybody. Thank you again for being here. Happy Friday. Full disclosure, on Monday, I tested positive for COVID-19. Thankfully, the symptoms are under control, but I may not have my typical energy level as I ordinarily would under these circumstances. So bear with me on that. And the other point to make is that not initially, but later in this particular presentation, I mentioned some pretty unsettling terms that the media has used to describe us. So that's a trigger warning of sorts. These are not my words. They're actually the words of an old magazine, Life magazine, back when it was being published, like from the early 70s, when there were words that were permissible back then that are deemed offensive today, thankfully, which will be mentioned because I feel they should be. I don't want to sugarcoat what they wrote, but that is a trigger warning. Before we get to that slide, I'll issue just another warning about that. All right, so neurodiversity and the media, proper representation and misrepresentation. Now, the thing to keep in mind about this is that our community is anything but monolithic. We are a highly, highly diversified community. Those of us who are autistic, neurodivergent in other ways, that what I construe as being proper representation or misrepresentation, somebody else in our community may very well disagree, and that's okay. What bothers one individual might not bother another individual as much. So that's just something to bear in mind. So, probably more than anybody else in our community, there are three screen characters in particular that have stood out from what I've been able to gather in our community, and particularly among self-advocates like me, of autistic portrayals. One of them being really the archetypical example in a movie from the late 80s called Rain Man, the character of Raymond Babbitt. And then Sheldon Cooper from the series The Big Bang Theory, as well as young Sheldon, and Dr. Shaum Murphy from The Good Doctor. I hear those three mentioned really considerably more often than anybody else. The thing to note about all three of them are that all three are male, and all three portrayals are by actors who are non-autistic. And all too often, we run into that. We run into autistic characters not being played by those who share our neurotype. And so without having those lived experiences, what I've found in my research on this is that a number of autistic individuals watching these shows are able to see that, and understandably, as I do, they object to it from an authenticity perspective. And it calls into question how authentic these portrayals really are. It's the popular saying, nothing about us without us, that comes into play here. That oftentimes in the media, there are folks writing about us or portraying autistic characters who aren't themselves autistic. And that's something more and more of us are increasingly taking issue with. And thankfully, later in this presentation, there are more current examples of screen portrayals that thankfully are in line with that I equate with proper representation, where you have autistic actors playing autistic characters, or in the case of one reality series, playing themselves. And that is as it should be, in my view.
Question. Yes. Doesn't that kind of defeat the whole point of acting? Pretending that you're something that you're really not? My question isn't like, okay, were any of these actors really autistic, but how accurate is their portrayal of someone who is autistic, relatively speaking? Because, if their portrayal is still accurate, then I don't see why it matters if they're actually autistic in real life.
Mine is the opinion of one individual. I am certain that there are plenty of folks out there who look at the characters, for example, of Raymond Babbitt, Sheldon Cooper, Dr. Shaum Murphy, who do view them as being sound and who strike them as maybe being autistic enough, because again, our community is anything but monolithic. Certainly there are going to be people in our community who are good with these portrayals. I have my view. It's the view of just one individual. But you bring up a valid point. You're right. People who act by virtue of their profession are going to be playing individuals unlike their true, genuine selves. But I think maybe it's a question of extent, the extent to which that's okay. We're going to find a diversity of opinions on this matter, but this is just my own view for what it's worth.
Yeah, but the reason I bring this up is because my dad was an actor. My dad was raised Jewish, and he played Santa Claus and the Pope, who are anything but Jewish.
It may be different for religion than it is for neurotype. It was a Jewish composer who wrote arguably the best known Christmas song ever written, White Christmas. Irving Berlin was Jewish. It may be different with some folks when the distinction is with respect to religion than with neurotype in this case. So you're going to find a whole variety of opinions on this, but you bring up a valid point. You certainly do. The interesting thing about Sheldon Cooper is that many of us feel as though this is an autistic character, though this is never revealed on either The Big Bang Theory or Young Sheldon. Many feel as though it may have helped to have him be mentioned as being autistic. That's one issue that that's relevant. And in the case of Shaum Murphy, a group of autistic individuals in Canada who were asked to weigh in on his portrayal of an autistic actor. They felt that it was more of a composite of the actor's previous neurodivergent and neurotypical portrayals, and they felt, as I did, that a role like his should have been played by an autistic actor. But again, this is a matter of opinion. And I think what's relevant here, again, is that our community is anything but monolithic. What works for one of us may not work for the other, and vice versa. But these are valid points that have been made and that have been written about, and they're just good to be aware of with respect to what people in our community have said. But what's more striking to me, really, than Sheldon Cooper and Shaum Murphy, and what I mentioned here, is with respect to Raymond Babbitt from the movie Rain Man, a movie in the late 80s. Many of you might be a little young to know of this movie, but people my age or around my age tend to remember it. Raymond Babbitt is perhaps arguably the first prominent autistic screen portrayal to be portrayed as autistic. It's made perfectly clear in the movie that he is autistic. The actor Dustin Hoffman, Me Too movement aside, did arguably a very good acting job in this role, good enough to win him a Best Actor Oscar. As a result of that, this movie was a huge commercial success. And as a result of that, a number of people who are non-autistic view Rain Man as being representative of all that they know about autism. And in my view, that's problematic. That based on one movie where the actor himself isn't non-autistic, that you count on this movie alone for your knowledge of autism, to me, that's highly problematic because you're not taking into account the lived experiences of those of us who are autistic. And I think that's why a lot of people take issue with the character of Raymond Babbitt and the movie Rain Man, where we are a very diversified community. A number of people, including me, will feel as though he doesn't represent us, that his talents, his struggles aren't indicative of our own challenges, our own talents. There are things that this character pulls off in the movie that I couldn't do in a million years. And there are struggles that he encounters in the movie that are not at all true of me or of many other advocates like me in the community. And then a true story, a good friend of mine introduced me to a friend of hers whose son is autistic. And we were talking on the phone, and she admitted point blank to me, well, Sam, everything I know about autism, I learned from the movie Rain Man. She was about my age, maybe a little older. And I had reminded her that there's a lot more to autism than what the character Raymond Babbitt represents. We're a greatly diversified community. This is but one screen character. I would be happy to talk to you about my experiences. I have a book you could read. There are numerous autistic authors whose books you could read to get just a more well-rounded view of what we're about, which ideally would come from a diversity of sources, and ideally a good number of whom would be autistic individuals with real autistic lived experiences, people like us who live it, breathe it every day, that ideally your knowledge of autism would come from a variety of sources. And by the way, you're putting all your stock into a movie where the character was played by an actor who's not autistic. Not at all that this is Dustin Hoffman's fault, not at all. But there are just better ways to go about this. That was many, many years ago, back in the late 80s, where it's in many ways back then understandable that a non-autistic actor would play an autistic role. But still, when a lot of people count on one highly popular screen portrayal to give them sufficient knowledge of autism that's sufficient in their minds, to me, that's problematic.
There's another movie that stars an autistic character called I Am Sam. Have you ever seen that one?
I've heard of it. I'll admit I haven't seen it. Rain Man I saw, but not that.
I was just going to ask what your opinion was on this other movie, but if you haven't seen it, then yeah.
I won't weigh in on it because I haven't even seen it, but yeah. So those are but 3 examples of autistic characters, all of them male, all of them played by non-autistic individuals by no fault of their own. But ideally, we could go beyond that, that's all. Now on to another subject. These are media misrepresentations that kind of revolve around the medical field. I wrote about this in an article a number of years ago for NBC News, but this goes back pretty far. That maybe some of you had heard about this, and it was highly advertised in the media, that in connection with the MMR vaccine, in this case, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, misinformation had been spread about this vaccine, that if you take it, it could likely cause autism. People regrettably spread this lie to try to get people to get onto their side of kind of being anti-vaccination in general. People are entitled to their opinions, but what in my mind they aren't entitled to is to push these things at the expense of others, and particularly at the expense of those of us in society who are vulnerable. This was a conspiracy theory that had been debunked by highly regarded medical journals. The Lancet, which is a medical journal, I believe, out of the UK, thankfully came out and debunked any linkage claimed between the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causing autism. But it happens at a cost. People often believe what they hear. And when they hear about a vaccine that they believe, as others falsely say, cause autism, they end up not taking it. And as a result of that, it's true that in the wake of this conspiracy theory, rates of measles, mumps, and rubella jumped significantly. And it makes those of us who are autistic look really, really awful, needless to say. Same thing with Tylenol. The legal community talked about this, saying, well, if you were a mother who delivered an autistic child and you happen to have taken Tylenol during pregnancy, you may be able to have a legal claim. against the makers of Tylenol. Call up the lawyer. You may be entitled to compensation. It's others who are profiting at our expense. We are not side effects of any given medication or the side effect of a vaccine. That's not what autism is. I can appreciate that maybe with certain things, something might happen medically where maybe you develop symptoms that are indicative to some extent of autism, but that is not, that's to be distinguished from autism itself. Autism is a neurotype. It's not a side effect of a vaccine or of a medication that you might take. But there are a number of people out there who believe that, who push these theories to try to profit or to try to get people to buy into their own narrative at our expense. And by neurotype, I'm referring to how our brains are wired, how our nervous systems function. There are a whole wide variety of neurotypes that naturally exist in the human population. And the neurotype of autism is one among many. Not a side effect, but a naturally occurring way that our brains are wired, but that, as we know, bring many unique, often very daunting challenges, but also unique attributes and talents. Our autism is not a side effect of whatever vaccine or whatever medication might be linked to autism by others.
Yeah, I just want to also mention along similar lines. There are some people who used to believe, and for all I know, still believe that that autism, or at least the symptoms of autism, can like somehow be treated based on a person's diet, like that it can be, you know, like some sort of food allergy or intolerance, or I mean that can be related to that. Not that, you know, oh, that's just something that I used to hear.
It doesn't surprise me, and these are but two examples. I know that there are many more, but these are two such examples. It's very, very easy for people to spread misinformation about us. We're a vulnerable segment of the population. For all the wrong reasons, we're stigmatized and marginalized in ways that we shouldn't be, that we don't deserve to be. And regrettably, there are people out there who exploit that either to profit or to try to further their own narrative, to try to get other people to buy into their belief system, their narrative of things. Does not mean it's true. And if you're like me, and I know there are others of you who have this outlook the way I do, that when we view our autism as being core to who we are, to our sense of self, those of us who have worked really, really hard in spite of stigma to accept our autism and to view it as being part of ourselves, that's when these sorts of misrepresentations can really do harm. When we really feel like we're being attacked, when people are trying to benefit at our expense. All right, so we're about to come to the slide where like I said earlier, there's language on this slide, admittedly, that might trigger some of us. These are not easy words to take, but they need to be said. Here's the trigger warning, and here is the slide. This relates to Life magazine. In an October issue of Life magazine, this was a weekly, long time ago, this was a weekly periodical circulated worldwide, a viewership in who knows how many millions of people. Life magazine was about as big as it got in 1972 in terms of popular magazines. Last April, I returned to my old special needs school, a school in New Jersey called the Center School, which I went to in the mid-70s. I returned there last April to give a presentation around my book. Recently, the school had celebrated their 50th anniversary, and they circulated copies of this old 1972 issue of Life magazine to commemorate their 50 years of existence. And they were very generous to have gifted me a copy of the magazine, thinking that it would be interesting to me to read about what was being said about my school, which I would attend only a couple of years after this 1972 issue had been published. And I was eager to look through it. Wow, a magazine from 1972. They had ads about how Richard Nixon was doing well in his presidential campaign. They had ads for television and car types that are now museum worthy. They had an article about people living in Vietnam who were under constant threat of being bombed because the Vietnam War was still going on back then. And then there was an article that had been written about my school, the Center School, and about some of the students who went there. Even though my picture wasn't taken, even though I specifically wasn't written about in the article, it wouldn't be until, what, 1974, just a few years after, that I would enroll at the Center School. This was where my parents sent me because in the early days of special education, this was one of the few schools around that they were comfortable sending me to. I was shocked to see how my school and its students were being portrayed. And by extension, I took offense to it because this was me only a couple of years after the fact. I'm connected to this, even though the article wasn't directly specific to me. They called the article an agony of learning. Those of us who went to this school, this was when autism was being diagnosed very, very differently than how it's been diagnosed in recent years. We were not given an autism diagnosis. Our diagnosis back then, including me, was that of a learning disability. And they have the nerve on the front cover of this magazine to allude to the article with the words, bright children who can't learn. And I was so taken aback by this that I had to write an article about how it made me feel, as if to say, well, what the heck have you done here, Life magazine? It wasn't as if I didn't know how to learn. or that my fellow center school classmates couldn't learn. It's that we learned differently. We were unique learners, but certainly we learned. An agony of learning. Learning was never agonizing for me in the true sense of the word. I have no recollection whatsoever of having felt that what I was doing was agonizing to me. That's a strong word. And when it's on the front cover of a highly, highly popular magazine circulated worldwide, what you get is the perpetuation of very harmful stereotypes that, at least to some extent, linger to this day. And that's why a more than 50-year-old article written about learning disabled individuals at the school I attended still, nonetheless, to some extent, remains relevant. Words like retarded, brutally handicapped, showing pictures of boys with tears in their eyes, having an impossible time trying to learn. Like, was this a picture that you really had to put in this magazine? Not all of us at the center school had tears in our eyes as we tried to learn. Hurtful language, offensive in today's terms, and yet back in 1972, perfectly permissible to put into Life magazine. The silver lining around all of this is that at least progress has been made in that words like these that were permissible back then, if you look them up, if you Google them, they are thankfully considered and for some time have been considered as they should be, to be offensive, because they are. That at least that's the silver lining. Progress has been made. Arguably, there's still a lot more progress to be made. But all of these statements that you see here on this slide were not at all indicative of how I remember my experience at the center school. It was as if profits were being prioritized over people. When you put words on the front of a magazine article, bright children who can't learn, unfortunately, oftentimes negative language is what sells. And let's face it, if you're a magazine and you're trying to sell copies of a magazine, you're going to do what you need to do in order to sell your magazine, but at what cost? At what cost? The perpetuation of very, very harmful stereotypes that regrettably linger to this day. Well, this was not me. I learned, I understood, I grew. This was my very first school when I began my grade school career in kindergarten. I would go on by 5th grade to no longer need to be in the special ed classroom. By 5th grade, I was 100% general education. How do I do that well when the school that helped me lay the foundation for all the future success I would have? Clearly, the center school did a lot right by me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had these successes in later years. Damn straight I learned and I grew. And yet, Time magazine labels me, my classmates, a bright child who can't learn. Nonsense. And outright false. But heck, whatever sells, but at what cost? This I took personally because they were indirectly writing about me and about my classmates and about my school. And I took offense to that. All right, we're going to move on to better and brighter things. I figured I'd save the best for last. So maybe some of you have come across this Netflix reality series called Love on the Spectrum. I've encountered some people online and in the community who aren't really into this show, who have fair criticisms of it, others who really, really like it. I have a quote at the bottom of this slide of a mother of an autistic son who really got into the show feeling it was genuine enough that it gave her a sense of how her autistic son's future might be as an adult. This is an Emmy Award-winning Netflix unstructured, that's the key here, unstructured reality series. In other words, driven by the actions of the characters without no overly specific predefined template to follow. You have autistic men and women playing their own selves. This is a reality show, no fictional characters, unlike the screen characters we talked about earlier. These are autistic individuals being who they are, being their true authentic selves, diving into the unpredictable world of dating, love, and romance. The beauty of this show, in my mind, is that what you have here is you have autism unmasked. And you have it unmasked on a global scale. And it succeeds. Not every show gets an 8.2 out of 10 International Movie Database rating. But in many ways, to me, it makes sense because when you have the authenticity of autistic individuals playing themselves, and heaven only knows, showing how vulnerable they can be in a dating scenario. This was an area in my life that when I was younger, I struggled mightily with in terms of dating. That authenticity and vulnerability resonate. And then you have the article where the quote I mentioned earlier comes out of. If things are done with authenticity, with autistic individuals being themselves, not pretending or acting to be somebody they're not, it resonates enough that this mother truly felt this show could be representative of how her own autistic son could turn out once he reaches adulthood. So to me, that's more like it. Whatever one might think of the show, if they like it, they don't like it, the truth of the matter is that the real beauty of Love on the Spectrum is that this is autism unmasked. I've talked in previous author talks and in previous articles of mine about all the damage that masking can do. Oftentimes we do it in response to trauma. We do it in our efforts to fit in with our non-autistic peers. We cover up our true selves all too often in order to fit in. Here, you have autism unmasked. And I just think that's a wonderful thing. There's a new Broadway musical some of you may have heard about that's developed a cult following of sorts. It's a Broadway musical called How to Dance in Ohio. What's remarkable about this Broadway musical is that not one, not two, but three different individuals in my social circle brought this show to my attention, and they did so, all of them, with great excitement. They're like, Sam, have you heard about this show? Three of them. A former high school teacher of mine who I keep in touch with on Facebook, my cousin, one other individual who I went to college with. They reached out to me about this show with such excitement, to which I replied, yeah, isn't this wonderful? This is a Broadway musical where all the actors are autistic, playing autistic roles. Back around 2016, a documentary of the same name had been released, which dealt with autistic individuals who were approached by a clinician to say, hey, wouldn't you guys like to have a spring formal dance to go to? Because sadly, all too often when you're young and autistic, you often don't really feel a warm invite to your school's prom. Regrettably. Again, that's the stigma we're up against, rearing its ugly head. So a clinician thought to themselves, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we gave these particular autistic individuals a chance to have a spring formal, a prom of sorts, where there are certain skills that come into play. When you go to a dance, it's building up the confidence to ask somebody to dance with them. It's certain social skills that come into play that could be taught and that were taught with success. The formal dance actually did happen. And the documentary was enough of a success that a Broadway musical was adapted from it of the same name. I think it was out in 2023, just this past year, How to Dance in Ohio. And what's interesting is that the autistic individuals in the documentary, when they heard about the Broadway musical, many of them paid the money to see it many, many, many times over, being so excited about it that they felt it was authentic enough that it was worth seeing repeatedly, some of whom were interviewed, I think, by ABC. Autistic actors portraying real-life autistic individuals as it would ideally be. Furthermore, sure, you have a script, you've got songs in this musical, you know, with fixed lyrics, but at the same time, at certain parts in the show, actors are invited to deviate from the script to bring out some aspect of themselves that they may otherwise not have the opportunity to do if they need to remain on script the whole time. To bring out some aspect of their true, authentic selves. Again, what I'm getting at here is the value of authenticity that really can only truly come when you have autistic actors playing the role of autistic individuals, to have true 100% authenticity. The producers of the Broadway musical, when they were trying to get this show off the ground, were warned, oh, you'll never find Broadway caliber autistic actors to pull this off. Well, apparently they did. And when I watched an interview of the creator of the musical version, one of them, she said, we found enough sufficiently talented Broadway caliber autistic actors to fill these roles 3 times over, she admitted, 3 times over. A wonderful stereotype busting scenario where oftentimes as autistics, we're told, oh, you guys would be really good in, for example, in the STEM fields, science, technology, math. I'm a prime example. I'm an information technology consultant. It's kind of a STEM field. But what not enough people understand, and what we're all trying to rewrite the narrative on, is that whatever career path non-autistic people follow, we can follow as well. Teachers, actors, artists, engineers, lawyers, politicians, you name it. We're out there. And this musical beautifully illustrates that. And it's good. It is a good show. It's developed a cult following of sorts. And you have autistic men, women, and you have a Black autistic actor in the cast. It's a cast of around 7 or 8 people who, as in the documentary, are learning to ask people to dance at a formal dance type setting. And it's nice to see men, women, and people of color represented in one show. It's nice to see that. What's noteworthy here is that the theater at which How to Dance in Ohio is being performed on Broadway is that they have accommodations in place at the theater for both the actors and for the audience to use as needed. You have a sensory room. If you need to take a break, walk away from the show and take a break. A sensory room that's quiet with the lights dimmed, with comfortable chairs and blankets to take a break from all the action. Sunglasses and noise-canceling headphones are made available for those who may be sensitive to the lights or to louder noises. And at the request of the actors of the show, they wanted fragrance-free, dye-free soap in the bathrooms. And so the producers of the show, in order to be what I would call neuro-inclusive, changed out all the soap and put in fragrance-free soap in the bathrooms for the cast and for audience members alike to use. When a couple of the actors of this Broadway musical were interviewed, they admitted that they didn't want to be viewed as being an inspiration to other people. They were asked, well, when the audience comes and they see such a great show being put on by autistic actors, wouldn't it be understandable to you that they would feel inspired? To which they replied, Well, I kind of get it, but we don't want to be viewed as being inspirational for overcoming what people view as us rising above our diagnosis. We don't want to be viewed as inspirational in that light. We want to be viewed as being good at what we do in our own right. Not to be seen as inspirational for rising above our challenges, but inspirational in our own right. The way non-autistic Broadway actors might inspire others, or might be adept at entertaining others or making others feel good. The point being that as autistic individuals, and particularly these cast members of How to Dance in Ohio, we don't want to be viewed as, well, you were so inspiring, but you're autistic. We would rather be told, well, you were great. This was a great show. Wonderful job. Leave it at that. Because we don't all want to be viewed as being great because we're overcoming challenges. We want to be viewed as having been really good in our own right. On the same plane, a more level playing field for all actors, whether autistic or not. And they expressed the hope that over time, they would be viewed in that light. Many of them said in this interview, maybe in a couple of years, maybe towards the end of the 2020s, they said. That's what these actors admitted when interviewed, I think it was by ABC News, that they are working towards. So to me, that's a wonderful triumph of sound representation. Not necessarily in a magazine or in the movies or on TV, but in this case, on the Broadway stage. And certainly worthy of being aware of. How to Dance in Ohio. All right, so because I've been feeling a little under the weather this week, I didn't admittedly get around to listing all the myriad of articles on which I based this presentation. There are a bunch of them. But if those of you who want the links to the relevant articles, to read up on them, for more on this subject than what I've relayed today, I invite you to reach out to my website, samfarmerauthor.com/contact. There you can leave me a message and request links to the articles on which I based this presentation. And I'll be happy when I am able and feeling better, and when I have the time, I will respond when I can with the relevant links. Because for this presentation in particular, there were a whole bunch of articles that I just didn't get around to listing on this slide. And by the way, you can request this slide deck as well. So feel free to reach out if you'd like more information.
Actually, Sam, I did want to get your opinion on there's a bit of a paradox, it seems, that if we're trying to educate the public on what it means to be autistic, and we're using media, I mean, a lot of times people respond to entertainment, so I guess it's no surprise that these fictional characters gain a lot of traction and reinforcing stereotypes. If there's such a tremendous range of individuals, you know, what would you recommend would be the best way, or maybe what combination of ways would be the best to really educate the public on what it really means to be autistic?
In my view, Roger, maybe the best way to do this, for example, you could go on to Amazon and you could do a search on autism, autistic authors. You could do a Google search, autistic authors, neurodivergent authors. And where our community is so unbelievably diversified, in an ideal world, you would pick up X number of books by autistic, neurodivergent authors who have the lived experiences, who live it and breathe it every day. I am but one among so many examples of neurodivergent individuals who have written books about their lived experiences. And the greater the diversity of books that you have time to read, the better. And ideally by autistic men, autistic women, autistic individuals of color, autistics who are LGBTQ or who are heterosexual or cisgender or gender non-conforming. That's the thing.
With all
And
of
us
this
old ones, don't forget
intersection,
us old ones.
Yeah, young, old, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, from America, from Europe, from Africa. The intersectionality is so vast, it can get overwhelming. But in an ideal world, you would draw what you'd want to learn about autism from as wide a diversity of neurodivergent authors as possible. Not that non-autistic people shouldn't have a seat at the table. That's not what I'm saying. But we need to have a seat at the table with them. We are all in this together. We should all be at the table, interacting with each other. And the greater the diversity of neurodivergent individuals from which you can learn about neurodivergence, the better. In an ideal world, that's how I would envision it. That's just me.
Yeah, I think that's so. There is, I guess there really is no shortcut. I mean, it's almost like
There's no
trying to
shortcut.
define. It's kind of like how to define a human being. You know, you can't.
There absolutely is no shortcut, because when there is, Roger, the danger you run into, and this is true of the archetypical Raymond Babbitt character from Rain Man, is that you'll tend to oversimplify. And you'll say, oh, I saw Rain Man. That told me what I need to know. No, doesn't work that way.
to me,
That's how
that's a
stereotypes
gross.
get formed.
Correct. It's a gross oversimplification. If it's just a one size fits all approach, does not fly in my view. Doesn't fly. But unfortunately, that's what too many people resort to. And that's where we as a community get into serious trouble, in my view.
Thanks, and I think that's really helpful. That
Yeah,
in addition to being an author, Sam, I know that you do a lot of speaking to the public, either through Zoom and live as well. So I
I
think there's
try. Often
as
it
many
feels
people
like
who
it's an
want to do
uphill
that,
battle,
better.
but I try. I just am trying to do my part. Thank you all for all these comments. I tend to hyper focus on what I'm presenting on, that admittedly I haven't been able to read through all these, but thank you for them.
Okay, and if you weren't here at the beginning, if you would like a complimentary copy of Sam's book, you can email me here. So my email address is below in the picture frame here.
Sam, are you going to sign them?
They're
Absolutely.
signed.
Roger will back me up on that because
Yep,
he's seen them. They are all
Actually,
signed.
a few of you have gotten your copies from the
They're
talk
all
we
signed, just a
gave.
few pages in,
Yep.
because I was told a while ago that sometimes front covers can get torn off over
Mhm.
time, that if you go a few pages in, then my writing is preserved. If for whatever reason the book gets banged up a little. But a few pages in, you'll find my handwriting. They're all signed, all of them.
Yep. So yeah, if you want a copy and you haven't got one yet, just shoot me an email and we'll
Let
get one
Roger
out
know.
to you.
Thank you, Sam. That's very generous of you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And remember, if you want more information, links to the articles, some of which are mine, one or two of which are written by others, just reach out to me on my contact page requesting them, and I'll get back to you with those links when I can. And thank you all. This was fun.